reasons are very easy to understand. For example, in the following story from Coquitlam, which is just a short distance east of Vancouver, it seems that in the summer of 1985, the owner of a small apartment house decided to fix the place up a bit. As part of his renovations, he purchased 130 stone slabs to use as a decorative pathway. What none of the tenants in the building knew at the time was that their pretty new sidewalk had been constructed from headstones. Headstones removed when the land previously used by nearby Woodlands Hospital Cemetery was turned into a park. The hauntings in the building began as soon as the new pathway was laid. For the most part, the displaced spirits were benign. They were, however, impossible to ignore as they wandered throughout the various suites in the apartment block. One occupant was concerned enough to bring in a psychic, who confirmed that there were many spirits about the place, but reported that most of them were quite harmless, beyond their occasionally annoying ghost-like practical jokes, such as causing electrical devices to malfunction. The people whose homes were in this particular building had more than their share of those sorts of problems. Toasters would spontaneously heat up, lights would turn on and off, televisions would change channels, all when no one was near them. Considerably more disturbing, however, were the ghost sightings. A woman whose name was only been recorded as Mrs. Snyder reported catching an occasional glimpse of the apparition of a child in a nearby suite. However, the ghostly sightings were decidedly more threatening. There, children saw disembodied faces at night, and, as they stared in horror, their beds would shake violently. The building began to develop a well-deserved reputation as a haunted apartment house. The children from the neighborhood became fascinated with the place until one pried up and turned over a piece of newly installed sidewalk. The youngsters fled as soon as they discovered that the particular piece of walk had been upturned as a headstone from a child's grave. When the tenants expressed their displeasure at the landlord's decidedly odd sense of decorum, he relented, dug up the walk, and created a more traditional one. Unfortunately, the haunting had already become well established, and phantoms were seen in the building for many years afterward. By the early 1990s, the energy of the understandably agitated spirits had sufficiently subsided so that the dead and the living were at last able to share their accommodation in peace. Where's Waldo? In the case of the British Columbia town of that name, the answer to that question is that what's left of it has been flooded over. However, according to local historian John Kinnear, some of Waldo does reappear at certain times of the year. Located in the southwest of Fernie, Waldo was once a thriving community with 2 large sawmills, 2 hotels, a large school, stores, and an Anglican church, and a post office serving a population of 700 people. The town's decline began in the early 1920s when the first mill closed. Less than 3 years later, a fire destroyed virtually the entire town, leaving only 6 houses and the church standing. In March 1972, the church was moved to nearby Paynes Lake. The remnants of the houses were demolished to the footings, and the entire area was flooded as a consequence of the construction of the Libby Dam and the subsequent filling of Lake Koocanusa. It is the foundations of those last remaining residences that reappear when the lake's water level dips. All the houses were vacant long before they were destroyed, with the possible exception of a haunted house that may still have sheltered its ghost. Like the town itself, the haunted house in Waldo was small, so small that it could have been a cozy, welcoming little space, but it was not. The place should have been a bargain, considering the small amount of rent that a landlord could demand in the isolation of a ghost town. But in terms of wear and tear on the tenants' nerves, one of Waldo's last occupied houses was anything but a good deal. By the time a painter and his wife signed a short-term lease for the place, the paranormal activity in it had already driven out at least one tenant. To help ensure that these new residents would at least have a chance of staying season that they planned to, the landlord tried to explain as clearly as possible that unique rental conditions were attached to the property. He even went so far as to set down some decidedly peculiar guidelines, ones not recommended by any landlord and tenant act that I've ever heard of. The couple was advised to always leave everything in the house just as they found it, no matter how inconvenient they might find it to be. Windows, for instance, that they found open should be left that way, even if doing so meant that the interior of the house became uncomfortably chilly. These unusual terms combined with a definite feeling of unease while in one of the bedrooms caused the new occupants to make inquiries of old-timers in the area. Before long, the couple had pieced together the reasons, not for the former tenant's flight, but also for their own feelings of discomfort for the landlord's strange directions. It seemed that the little house was widely believed to be haunted by the ghost of an elderly man who had once called the place home. As they were intending to only stay for the summer, the couple decided to make the best of their strange housing bargain. In order to accommodate the never-seen but frequently felt presence, they were careful to abide by their landlord's advice. They left the furniture arranged exactly as it was when they first saw the place, even though that arrangement was not the one that would have preferred. They never opened a window that they found closed, nor closed one that was open. The ghost, however, did not return their courtesies. It would frequently scatter books and papers about the place, regardless of the mess. The couple always left everything as they found it. They learned from experience that eventually the unseen hand that had caused the disorder would tidy the mess that they had made. Despite the couple's efforts to be considerate, they were living in a haunted house, and the ghost was apparently not going to let them forget it. Every evening, for instance, the clock on the mantel would chime. This situation in itself might not have been considered too unusual, except that the clock was only a shell with no internal mechanism. The clock would have been incapable of making any sound. Furthermore, doors would suddenly slam close with such force that all the window panes in the house would shake. A few months later, as planned, the couple moved out of town, having lost little except temporarily their serenity. In return, they had gained a unique experience and a stockpile of stories with which to entertain their friends and family for years to come. Knowing about the dam construction and its associated flooding, we do know the answer to the popular question, where's Waldo? But we're still left to ponder where the ghost of Waldo could have gone. Jason and Johnny. For a time during the 1970s, on a quiet street in North Vancouver, a most unusual friendship flourished. Unfortunately, this friendship had a lot of people concerned. You see, there was quite a difference in the ages of the two parties involved. Jason was just a little boy and Johnny was an adult. More importantly, Johnny was dead and had been for years. Oh my goodness. We have a visitor, guys. It's a cat. Smokes. Smokes, you're interrupting our story. Are you going to listen or are you going to bother us? I think you should sit down and listen to the story. Jason was a lonely little fellow who wasn't in a position to be too picky about how and where he chose his friends. He was an only child of a single mother. Johnny came to see Jason regularly and was nice to the boy. Those qualifications were more than adequate for friendship as far as Jason was concerned. The situation, however, was of grave concern to Jason's mother. Her son's relationship with Johnny had begun when the child was less than 1 year old. She first became aware that something was extremely unusual was happening when she awoke to a strange sound coming from Jason's bedroom. At first she wasn't able to identify the sound, but after listening for a few seconds, she realized that the little boy was laughing out loud and hard. The woman flew from her room into Jason's, presuming that the child was just dreaming. What she found gave her quite a start. Her son was sitting up in his crib, laughing hysterically. It was clear to Jason that there was someone else in the room with him, and that someone was bringing him no end of delight. Unfortunately, his mother could not see what her son could. The laughing incident was only the beginning. These strange nightly occurrences became longer and more frequent. As a result, the child was missing out on badly needed sleep. He was completely exhausted. She said of her son during that period. One morning, after the visits had been going on for more than a year, Jason's mother discovered that the child's room had been trashed. Bedding had been ripped, toys smashed, and the legs of his bed had been torn off. The mother recalled all of this destruction after a single night when their house had been unusually quiet. Much to her almost immediate regret, she punished Jason for having done so much damage to his room. She realized not long afterward that Jason could not possibly have been responsible for the mess. He was neither big enough nor strong enough to have brought that much destruction. In retrospect, she realized that it was Johnny, not Jason, who had ravaged the room, and Johnny's antics were about to increase in frequency and intensity. Over the next few years, mother and son lived in chaos. Because he was visiting with his friend, Jason rarely slept between the hours of midnight and 4 in the morning. Jason's mother once watched in horror as a lampshade spun madly on its frame. No one was near the fixture at the time. The kitchen in the house became a focal point for ghostly activity. Cupboard doors flew open and closed, drawers that were opened would slam shut, and a small appliance that had been hung on the wall dropped to the floor. In the living room, an ornament that had been standing on a table flew toward a couch. A friend from the neighborhood who was visiting watched as Jason's mother emptied dirty water from a vase of flowers. Seconds later, she returned to the kitchen table to join her friend and found the vase, once again, filled with dirty water. The mother's doctor thought that the woman had suffered a nervous breakdown when he heard her describe her living condition. Fortunately, there had been witnesses to these other occurrences as well, so her friends and family were able to vouch for her sanity. In addition to the water from the flowers reappearing, friends of Jason's mother had seen a hanging lamp swinging madly and pictures rocking back and forth, as well as the lampshade spinning. When a friend's daughter heard disembodied growl, Jason's mother knew that she couldn't cope any longer. Her discomfort increased considerably when she began to hear talk around the neighborhood that their home stood on the ground that had once been a burial site for the Burrard First Nations band. Feeling at a loss as to how to cope with the situation she found herself in, the woman contacted both a member of the Vancouver Psychic Society and a person from the Burrard band. The pair was able to confirm the woman's suspicions. visited by the spirit of a band member whose body had, years ago, been interred somewhere very near to her house. They were not, however, able to effect anything that would put a stop to the hauntings. In the meantime, the strength of the visitor from beyond increased to the point that she could hear the ghost's deep, masculine voice. Jason, however, remained the only person who could actually see his friend. The lad described the entity as looking like Daniel Boone in buckskins. Eventually, the haunting escalated and the mother contacted a psychologist to ask for help. In the doctor's opinion, the boy had been traumatized by his father's departure from the family and had created Johnny from anthropomorphized psychic energy. It is doubtful that the psychologist's diagnosis brought Jason's mother much consolation. Whether the spirit had manifested from the native burial ground or from her son's mental powers, it undeniably did exist. Not only had she heard a grown man's voice when she and Jason were alone in the house, but she and others had witnessed the mysterious whirlwinds of energy and an unseen force that moved through her house on numerous occasions. This story is one of the many ghost stories that, for us, can have no definitive ending. There is apparently no information available about what happened with this paranormally disturbed family since the summer of 1976 when Jason was a child of 3. In many cases like this one, the children temporarily lose their ability to perceive the supernatural and do not regain it until they reach puberty. If Jason followed this pattern, life for mother and son would have calmed down for a time. All that we can do is hope that Jason not only survived his childhood, but perhaps even thrived because of its unusual nature. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed those stories. This is my first ASMR video, so please bear with me. Things will get better as I learn more about ASMR and what makes a good ASMR video. But for now, I hope this stories helped you